Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is one of the highly rated titles for the DS as a puzzle adventure game. Following the mystery story of the main character's untimely death, along with his lost memories of himself, that branches out to a deeper side of it all. With each new chapter provides a new mystery to the story that's kinda hard to wrap around in the middle, that'll possibly get you easily hooked. Kinda like with the Ace Attorney series, but more on with the action. Considering Shu Takumi is the creator of Ghost Trick, who was also the creator of the Ace Attorney series, the game would be expectedly be good, especially with Masakazu Sugimori as the composer along with Keiji Inafune as the executive producer. The three of them along with their team have made one of the best DS games ever made. Well, in my humble opinion at least, having played a bunch of their past works and the other DS games I've played. Although, despite all that amount of positive praise it received throughout the past, unfortunately, not a lot of people heard about this. Despite Ghost Trick's unique appealing charm, captivating story, and the decent sound design, its popularity wasn't as big compared to the other titles of its time. Now, I know that there's a remastered version of it. I already bought mine early on considering the limited amount of sales it has on my local store. But I wanted to play the DS version 1 first before I'd compare it to the remastered for my next video of it later on, just to have a proper comparison between the two, especially that I played the DS version twice, with the other playthrough being longer, as I look around with a lot more hidden stuffs around. This is K1PM. This time I'll be doing a full review of Ghost Trick Phantom Detective for the Nintendo DS. I'll be covering more in depth about the game and pointing out the pros and the cons of it. The game was developed and published by Capcom on June 19, 2010 in Japan, and around the second week of January 2011 for other countries. Now, considering this is a full review while the remaster just got its release recently, there were gonna be some unavoidable spoilers here and there. The game is really good overall, trust me. I just don't wanna exactly spoil the fun for the others. Now for those who just wanna avoid the story part, since it's a bit long considering the story is a bit confusing, you could head down to this timestamp below. The story follows on the death of the main character, who becomes a ghost who apparently lost his memory. Not sure what to do as he sees the girl in distress, a different ghost comes around named Ray. Ray proceeds to teach him about his newly found powers on what he calls it as powers of the dead. Being able to manipulate objects, traversing through different phone lines, communicating with the recently dead, and returning to the last 4 minutes before death of a person. Whereas altering the events in between that 4-minute mark can actually save them from getting killed. Even through multiple occasions, it still works, as long as it's possible to do something important to change its course. With this new advantage, he managed to save the girl and altered her fate. Although he only has a night to spare before he fades away. He later on took Ray's advice to pursue any clues he has to those who are connected to him, especially the part how he died and who exactly killed him. He discovers his true name as Cecil and knows who were the people responsible for his death. While seeing Lin as one of their targets, he then decides to collaborate with Lin's case later on in hopes for any possible connection on what's going on, saving the people around and a cute little doggy named Missile, the best kind of partner he could rely on later on. Though he ends up getting himself killed afterwards, but Missile ends up gaining a different set of powers of the dead that could swap out different objects of the same face that depends on what the user sees. He ends up gaining them luckily after passing away near the Temsik meteorite fall, which is highly valued by a certain group there. After a series of events altering each of their fate to revive them and prison break times with Detective Jode, later on there would be some twists on how Lin was the one who actually shot Cecil, since Cecil ends up taking control of her at the time without her remembering about it. while the main character isn't actually this guy. Apparently, he's a different Sissel that has his own powers of the dead. He can only manipulate different people one at a time and can see other ghosts around, while being immortal due to the Temsik stone that directly struck him 10 years ago from a meteorite fall. Any wounds he receives, he ends up magically healing himself while not growing any older. He plans to target a lot of the different people around him, those who he had grudges against during the events of 10 years ago, and the ones who are stopping him at the moment. His real name is actually Yomiel, who goes by the name as Sissel in order to hide his identity, which the name came from his close pet cat, who he named after his deceased fiancée. He had an unfortunate series of events during his past life as a system engineer. With the help of Inspector Cabanella's tracking device and Detective Jode's tenacity, they soon managed to track down where Yomiel is heading out, as Detective Jode's daughter was kidnapped since she was assumed to be the daughter of the Justice Minister by mistake. Detective Jode and Lynn rush in to follow Yomiel to this submarine where these guys are hiding out throughout the whole time. The main character, who still calls himself as Sissel, ends up tracing Detective Jode within the submarine, along with Missile coming along. Yomiel had a deal with the leader of this group, named Sith. They've had to assist Yomiel with his plans for revenge, while they get to keep the Temsik stone that was stored in Yomiel's heart. But they later on double-crossed Yomiel as soon as they stole the Temsik stone for themselves, and they end up scuttling the whole submarine along with everyone else remaining. The two of them manage to meet up with Camilla and Lynn's lifeless body. Sissel took quite a while to change the events, but managed to revive her afterwards. As they try to save them as the submarine continues to sink, they find themselves trapped at the end until Yomiel suddenly emerges and tries to save them. Afterward, Yomiel ends up spilling the whole thing of what happened and the deal he had. They had a bit of a talk and understanding till the submarine continues to sink slowly. Lynn thought of a plan to get Sissel and Missile through the sea to get back where Detective Jode is, using the tracker that Inspector Cabanella gave a while ago and the torpedo left at the ship. With just enough luck, it somehow managed to reach this room where Detective Jode's body was left. They can still talk to him about what happened, although trying to save Detective Jode seemed inevitable to stop, though Yomiel's body is still present and be able to connect with. With Yomiel secretly hiding along with Sissel, they investigated the body of Yomiel and proceed to follow the 4-minute before death powers of Sissel, going back 10 years ago where it all began. Following the events of what actually happened 10 years ago, but in a much more clear way, Sissel, Missile, and Yomiel work together, and they manage to change the whole events of what happened, while Detective Jode has seen the whole thing. Yomiel didn't get hit by the Temsik meteorite, and luckily is still alive. Lynn kinda almost died again, but surely is safe in the end, while Detective Jode and the Black Cat ends up taking the hit from the meteorite shards, injuring them but not leaving them dead at least. As they've changed the past of what happened 10 years ago, this creates a whole new different present for them to exist, rewriting the events of what happened to them throughout the years, while the only ones who could remember what happened are the ones who were there to change it. Sissel, Missile, Yomiel, and Detective Jode. Yomiel managed to change and reconcile with himself. Detective Jode didn't end up possibly killing Yomiel, while Sissel finally realizes exactly who he is. To think he was the pet cat of Yomiel all along. Yomiel explains this further of what happened exactly before they tried to change it, and finally, Sissel understands all of what happened. As all things have settled as they go on to a new present, by the time Sissel is about to leave it all, suddenly someone interrupts, and that somebody is Ray himself, who turns out to be Missile all this time, but from a different timeline. the very first timeline before everything had started, where Yomiel and his collaborators with the Sith had managed to succeed with their plans of revenge, eliminating everyone who knew about the Temsik meteorite, while they got the Temsik directly from Yomiel himself, which I presume Yomiel somehow ends up getting buried by the submarine again. Missile tried to follow Yomiel's body and managed to turn back time with the whole 4-minute before death thing, but didn't exactly try to revive him. He instead waited for 10 years after, just to wait until the same event happens again. That starts out in the first game, waiting for Sissel to arrive while disguising himself as Rey. But the first encounter he had was a bad call. He didn't end up scaring Sissel that he has a time limit, thus Sissel during his timeline ends up leaving him somewhere else, I guess. He then tried again, most likely doing the 4-minute before death again, waiting for another 10 years I assume, just to inform the second Sissel of a time limit, as in the actual start of the game. To think Missile really waited that long goes to show how much of a loyal doggy he really is. That's why he's my favorite. In the end, they had a very heartwarming ending, changing most of the events of what happened before in creating a bright new future, while adding a bit of clues and hints of a possible continuation that they could possibly make in the near future. Or probably not, since it already has a good ending. The story of it all, from top to bottom, I find it really memorable in a good way. I personally love it as a whole, especially how likable and interesting the characters were, or how natural some of the jokes were added that got me laughing at times. With each new chapter brings a new mystery that I look forward to, that's hard to stop in between, kinda like a cliffhanger. Paired up with a great sound design and catchy soundtrack, I couldn't help but be fond of how the journey comes along. Although, yeah, this isn't the kind of story that has different multiple endings or routes to be had. But the way how it delivers, along with a lot of the hidden extra dialogues in between, was a nice touch they managed to create, much like the same things that the developers have done with the Ace Attorney series. For a story that involves different timelines to tackle while having more of a nested or twice the 4-minute before death thing, they pretty much did a solid job for it. As much as I praise its story so far, it's not exactly perfect as it is. There were some inconsistencies and a few troubles here and there that it's a bit hard to overlook at times. Such as during at the start of chapter 1, where after interacting a recently dead ghost of Lin, I should be able to talk to them again after the whole 4-minute before death thing, right? But for some reason I can't seem to talk with Lin, which I'm not quite sure why. I can't even see her core for some reason. It's possible that Sissel just started to learn the other Power of the Dead thing on the chapter 2 scene. Though it's not like the game has shown any signs of Sissel's improvement of the Power of the Dead part, right? But alright, I guess that's somewhat of a nitpick kind, I guess you could say. Although this one just seemed out of a surprise for a lot of people too, including me during the first time I played the game, how Sissel ends up being the cat all along. I mean, I got a clue that he might be the cat, when it's confirmed that Sissel isn't this guy or Yomiel after all on the later chapters, but it's more of a wild guess that I hardly accepted. Now hang on, just to be clear, I've tried every possible dialogues to look into, including the hidden ones when visiting Rey and the others, and I've played the whole game twice recently, and from what I found, there are a few hints that do point out that it's possible Sissel seems like this guy as a human. At the same time, he kinda feels like a cat. Like, there were a lot of times where he can't even read a single letter, has a bit of a behavior of a cat, wanting to go into tight places, doesn't know what a microscope is or even any stuffs on this table, or how he doesn't know what the word science is. The list goes on throughout the chapter apparently. It's pretty noticeable if the player pays close attention to it. Although at times, it does end up getting confusing, since Sissel understands what a gun is, know what the headphones are for, or even the way how Sissel talks is kinda like how a normal human can be. Unlike compared to Missile, that's pretty obvious, honestly. What's worse out of all is how the game kinda solidified that Sissel is most likely to be this guy at the start. Being the only dead person in the area, it doesn't show any kind of discord around. Where there should have been one, since Yomiel had accidentally shot his pet cat Sissel inside the bag after all. But, oh well. Again, I just wanted to emphasize this, that I'm not sure if this is an oversight problem, or probably an intentional one where Sissel lately develops to see other cores for after their first death, even though you should have been able to see it already, since you already successfully done the 4-minute before death thing with Lin during the chapter 1. But it's not like there's a single living core around Lin, right? But hey, the powers of the dead are still a mystery at this point. The powers may vary depending on who gains it and may change through the passing of time after all. Not even Yomiel or even the Altar Missile knows fully about it, despite both of them have already lived for more than 10 years. When it comes to the gameplay itself, Ghost Trick really stands out well on its own. Moving around through different objects just to get across an area, manipulating objects around and test the other stuffs to see which interacts with each other, or every time when Missile is around, swapping objects that have the same shape at a specific time frame had a unique concept for its game. Simple mechanics to understand while quite enjoyable to test around, bringing out the puzzle game genre to a whole new different level to play around. Cycling between the relaxing and the story-driven pacing of its puzzles, to the more intense ones like with the 4-minute before death puzzles, where returning to the last 4 minutes of a person's life could actually save them from interacting with its stuffs around, or could just lead to a different kind of death when you mess around too much, kinda like what happened to me with this one. Although a lot of the time during those moments is more of a trial and error kind of play. In most situations, you'll most likely gonna mess up. The game would provide some clues here and there in order for the player to progress later on. That also provides a playful kind of way to its dialogue when you mess around a lot with the stuffs in the game. It's kind of like Blaze Blue back in the days. Aside from that, when roaming around through different phone lines on each new chapter before chapter 16 starts, I like how there were a lot of hidden dialogues to explore that focuses on the other side of the people's story on their own for a bit, which acts more of an Easter egg kind of guess in a way that's easily missable. When it comes to the art and graphics of it, I find it unique for its time, seeing how smooth and expressive the characters can be at times despite the limitations of a Nintendo DS. Was quite the impressive feat on how they managed to pull through with it. Along with a decent background for each stages, I end up appreciating each of the sections of it. Looking at how Cabanetta dances around the stairs, along with most of the other animations in the game, were quite the sight to see. That's not the same as with the other games out there during its release date. Rendering the 3D models, then rasterizing or converting them to 2D sprites was a great idea they've done. When it comes to the soundtracks of the game, is one of the best things that it has to offer. It has a nice decent blend of mystery, intensity, and the upbeat smooth music that would keep you going. You got your Inspector Cabanella's classy jazzy theme along the way, Lynn's cheerful and energetic music when talking to her, to Missile's lovable and playful music when he's around. Even Detective Jode's theme has its chills when talking to him. Gotta love these 4 themes the most, that has a nice balance to each one of them. As do most of the soundtracks were really catchy to listen to, which fits very well with each of the scenarios in the story. Whether playing a soundtrack of a tragic event in the past would make you remorseful for them, up to how intense the situation plays out in a crisis. It's a mix of sounds that I find really engaging all throughout. And you know what? I expect no less from the same composer on the early titles of the Ace Attorney series, Masakazu Sugimori. I've listened to a bunch of his works in the past, and Ghost Trick is one of the best ones he've ever made. That's why I give this game a rating of 8.8 out of 10. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is one of the creatively great games out there that you'll rarely come across with. Not only did it provide a decently unique gameplay, but how intriguing the way it builds up itself for every chapter, along with its decently good characters. Paired up with a catchy set of soundtracks, I find the game quite enjoyable all throughout, despite I've played this one before during its first release. Playing it again, however, was a nostalgic ride for me. Though after trying to look more in depth about it, there are still some problems within the story now that I notice about it. But I'd say those are just the minor things. Now, would I recommend you on playing the game? If you're alright with this kind of story setup along with the unique mechanics of the game, by all means, try it out. Although, considering this is a DS game after all, it's kinda hard to find a copy of it. I suggest just go for the remastered version of the game instead. I already bought mine in preparation for my next video of it. Hopefully, some of you guys might look forward to it. For more videos such as these, why not head down to my channel to check things out. I do accurate game reviews of the past games, and some other new ones too. If you want to support my channel, a subscribe would be really nice. It kinda helps me out morally, to be honest. This is K1PM, and I bid you farewell.